The dirt crumbled beneath her trembling fingers as Danielle O'Connor dug deeper into the hard Arizona soil, each shovelful a piece of her heart breaking away. The setting sun cast long shadows across the barren land outside Tucson, painting the desert in shades of crimson that matched the dried blood beneath her fingernails. She'd been digging for hours, her dress torn and soiled, her face streaked with tears and dust. She didn't hear the approaching hoofbeats until they were almost upon her. Thomas Quinn reined in his horse, dust swirling around him as he stared down at the woman digging what was unmistakably a small grave. His journey from Texas had been long and hard, but nothing had prepared him for this sight. He'd been riding since dawn, hoping to reach Tucson before nightfall, but the woman's solitary figure against the vast desert landscape had caught his attention. "Madam," he called softly, dismounting with practiced ease. "Are you in need of assistance?" Danielle froze, her hands still clutching the shovel. She didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge his presence. The small bundle wrapped in a faded quilt lay beside the half-dug hole, and Thomas's heart sank when he realized what it contained. "Please leave," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "This is private." Thomas removed his hat, holding it against his chest. "No one should have to do this alone, madam." She finally turned, and Thomas was struck by her face, beautiful despite the grief etched into every feature. Her eyes, the color of the desert sky, were rimmed red, her dark hair falling in tangled waves around her shoulders. "You don't understand," she said. "I have to do this myself. It's my fault." Thomas stepped closer, careful not to frighten her. "Let me help you," he said gently. "Then you can tell me what happened if you want, or we can sit in silence, but let me help dig." For a moment he thought she might refuse, might order him away again. But then her shoulders sagged and the shovel slipped from her grasp, clattering against the rocky ground. "His name was James," she said, her voice barely audible above the desert wind. "He was 4 years old." Thomas nodded, picking up the shovel. "I'm Thomas Quinn," he said simply. "I'll dig, and you can sit with your boy for a while." As the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear, Thomas dug the grave deep enough to protect the child's remains from desert scavengers. Danielle sat beside the small bundle, occasionally stroking the quilt, whispering words too soft for Thomas to hear. When he finished, he stood back, sweat soaking his shirt despite the cooling night air. "It's ready," he said quietly. Danielle nodded, gathering the bundle in her arms. "Thank you," she whispered, stepping forward to place her child in the earth. Her legs buckled beneath her, and Thomas moved quickly to catch her, supporting her as she completed her heartbreaking task. Together, they filled the grave, neither speaking as dirt covered the small form. When it was done, Thomas found stones to mark the place, arranging them in a pattern over the mound. "Would you like to say something?" he asked. Danielle knelt beside the grave, placing a small wooden toy, a horse crudely carved from pine, atop the stones. "Sleep well, my sweet boy," she said, her voice breaking. "Mama loves you. Mama will always love you." They stood in silence as the desert night enveloped them. Finally, Thomas spoke. "Tucson's still a few miles off. You shouldn't be out here alone after dark. Can I escort you somewhere safe?" Danielle stared at the grave as if unable to tear herself away. I can't go back." Something in her tone alerted Thomas. "Are you in trouble, madam?" She laughed then, a harsh, broken sound. "You could say that. My husband will be looking for me by now. He'll kill me when he finds me." "Your husband?" Thomas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Was he responsible for your boy's passing?" Her silence was answer enough. Thomas looked at the woman, trembling, exhausted, and clearly terrified, and made a decision. "Come with me," he said. "I've got supplies, and my horse can carry us both a ways. We'll make camp for tonight, and tomorrow we can figure out what to do." "Why would you help me?" she asked, suspicion lacing her words. "You don't know me." Thomas looked back at the small grave. "No decent man would leave a woman alone out here, especially not after." He gestured at the grave. "Besides, I've seen enough in my life to know when someone needs a helping hand." Danielle hesitated, looking from Thomas to the grave and back again. "I can't leave him," she whispered. "You're not leaving him," Thomas said gently. "You've given him rest. Now you need to look after yourself." After a moment, she nodded slowly. "All right." Thomas led her to his horse, helping her mount before swinging up behind her. As they rode away, Danielle turned for one last look at the small pile of stones gleaming in the moonlight. They made camp in a sheltered spot about a mile away, where a cluster of rocks provided some protection from the wind. Thomas built a small fire, careful to keep it low so the light wouldn't be visible from a distance. "Are you hungry?" he asked, offering her jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags. Danielle took the food but didn't eat. "I haven't eaten since yesterday," she admitted. "I can't seem to." "Try," Thomas encouraged. "You need strength." She took a small bite of the jerky, chewing mechanically. Thomas didn't press her to talk, focusing instead on tending the fire and arranging blankets for her to rest upon. "How did you come to be out here alone?" He finally asked when she'd eaten a little. Danielle stared into the fire. "I ran," she said simply. 3 days ago, when Victor, my husband, was in town, James was all ready." Her voice caught. "I couldn't bury him there. Victor would have just thrown him in a ditch. My boy deserved better." Thomas nodded, understanding. "So you took him and fled." "I carried him as far as I could," she said. "I thought I could reach Tucson, find help there, but I couldn't. I was so tired, and she closed her eyes. "I couldn't carry him anymore. This seemed like a beautiful place." "It is," Thomas agreed, looking out at the star-filled sky. "Your boy has the heavens watching over him now." A single tear slid down Danielle's cheek. "James was always afraid of the dark. I used to tell him the stars were angels keeping watch." Thomas added a stick to the fire. "Smart mama," he said softly. "What happened to him, if you don't mind my asking?" Danielle's hands twisted in her lap. "Victor was drinking. He's always cruel when he drinks, but that night—" She shuddered. "James knocked over his whiskey. It was an accident. He's just a child. Victor threw him against the wall. I tried to stop him, but he hit me too. When I came to, James wasn't breathing." Thomas's jaw tightened. "This Victor, what's his full name?" "Victor O'Connor," she said. "He owns the largest cattle ranch outside of Green Valley. Everyone's afraid of him, including the sheriff." Thomas nodded slowly. He knew the type, well, men who used money and fear to control those around them. "And how long were you married to him?" 5 years, she whispered. "It wasn't always terrible. In the beginning, he could be charming, even kind. But after James was born, something changed. The drinking got worse, and then the beating started." "You tried to leave before," Thomas guessed. Danielle nodded. "Twice. The first time he found us in Phoenix, dragged us back and locked me in the cellar for a week. The second time, he caught us before we even reached the next town. He broke my arm and told me if I ever tried again, he'd kill James." Her voice dropped. "I should have known he'd do it anyway." Thomas wanted to offer comfort but knew no words would help. Instead, he poured her a cup of coffee from his pot. "Get some sleep if you can. We'll leave at first light." "Where will we go?" she asked. Thomas considered this. "I've got a friend in Tropic, Utah. Small town, but far enough away that your husband won't think to look there. We can get you somewhere safe while you decide what to do next." "Tropic? I've never heard of it. It's a new settlement, barely on any maps. Good people there." "My friend Owen runs the general store. He'll help us." Danielle looked skeptical. "It's too dangerous. Victor won't stop looking for me. He doesn't care about James, but he considers me his property." Anyone who helps me will be in danger too. Thomas met her eyes across the fire. I can handle myself, Mrs. O'Connor, and from what you've told me, your husband deserves whatever trouble comes his way. Please call me Danielle, she said. I don't want to be Mrs. O'Connor anymore. Danielle, then, Thomas agreed. And I'm Thomas, though most folks call me Tom. She studied him, as if truly seeing him for the first time. Why are you doing this, Thomas? Helping a stranger, risking your life, it doesn't make sense. Thomas poked at the fire, watching sparks rise into the night sky. My sister was married to a man like your husband, he said quietly. By the time I found out how bad things were, it was too late. I wasn't there when she needed me. I won't make that mistake again. Understanding dawned in Danielle's eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered. Thomas nodded, accepting her sympathy. Get some sleep, he repeated. I'll keep watch. Danielle hesitated, then wrapped herself in the blanket he'd provided. She lay down near the fire, her back to him, but Thomas could tell from the tension in her shoulders that sleep would be long in coming. As the night deepened around them, Thomas kept vigilant watch, his thoughts turning to the journey ahead. Tucson to Tropic was no easy trek, especially with a woman wanted by a powerful man. But as he watched Danielle finally fall into an exhausted sleep, he knew he'd made the right decision. Dawn broke clear and cold over the desert. Thomas had let the fire die hours ago, not wanting smoke to give away their position. He dozed intermittently, always with one hand near his revolver, but the night had passed without incident. Danielle woke with a start, momentarily disoriented. Then memory returned, and Thomas watched as grief washed over her face anew. Morning, he said softly, offering her water from his canteen. How are you feeling? Like it wasn't a nightmare, she replied, taking a small sip. Like my son is still dead and I'm still running. Thomas nodded, understanding there was nothing he could say to ease such pain. We should get moving soon. Your husband might have men searching already. Danielle pushed herself upright, wincing slightly. Thomas noticed bruises on her arms, visible where her dress sleeve had slipped during the night. Did you want to visit the grave once more before we leave? He asked gently. She looked in the direction they had come from, then shook her head. No, she said. I've said my goodbyes. James isn't there anymore, not really. Thomas helped her to her feet. We'll need supplies before heading north. I know a place outside Tucson where we can get what we need without attracting attention. I have no money, Danielle said. Thomas waved away her concern. I've got enough to get us started. They broke camp quickly, leaving no trace of their presence. Thomas helped Danielle onto his horse before mounting behind her, and they set off toward Tucson, keeping to the less traveled paths. As they rode, Thomas became aware of Danielle's stiffness, the way she held herself away from him despite the close quarters on horseback. We can stop and rest whenever you need, he told her. Just say the word. I'm fine, she said, though her voice betrayed her exhaustion. It's no weakness to need rest, Danielle. You've been through hell. After a moment, she nodded. Perhaps in an hour or so. They rode in companionable silence, the desert landscape stretching endlessly around them. Thomas could feel Danielle gradually relaxing, her body swaying with the horse's rhythm. You have family? She asked suddenly. Not anymore, Thomas replied. My parents died when I was young. My sister was all I had. And your sister's husband, after she? Dead, Thomas said flatly. Found him in a saloon in El Paso 2 years ago. Danielle didn't ask for details, and Thomas was grateful. Some memories were best left buried. What about you? He asked. Any family besides your husband? My father died in the war. My mother remarried a banker in St. Louis. We write occasionally, but we're not close. She never approved of Victor, though she didn't know how bad it was. Will you write to her now? Let her know what happened. Danielle was silent for a long moment. How could I tell her I let my child die? She finally whispered. Thomas reined in the horse, stopping in the shade of a large saguaro. Listen to me, he said firmly. You did not let your child die. That man killed your son, and from what you've told me, you risked your life trying to protect him. It wasn't enough, she said brokenly. No, Thomas agreed. It wasn't, but that's not your failing, it's his crime. He dismounted, then helped her down. Rest here a bit. Drink some water. They sat beneath the cactus, the morning sun already warming the desert air. Thomas watched as Danielle sipped from his canteen, noting how her hand still trembled slightly. How did you end up married to a man like O'Connor? He asked. Danielle gave a bitter laugh. The old story. Young, naive girl meets charming, wealthy rancher. My mother had just remarried, and I felt out of place in her new home. Victor seemed like escape, adventure. He courted me properly, flowers, chaperoned visits, the works. By the time I realized what he really was, we were already married and I was carrying James. And no one helped you. Neighbors, friends. Victor kept me isolated at the ranch. The few times I managed to reach out, people turned away. He has too much influence in Green Valley. She looked at Thomas. What about you? What brings you to Arizona? I'm a horse trader mostly, Thomas explained. I find good stock, train them, and sell them to ranches or the cavalry. I was heading to Tucson to meet a buyer when I found you. I'm sorry to disrupt your business. Thomas shrugged. The buyer can wait. Some things are more important. They rested for about half an hour before continuing toward Tucson. By midday, they reached a small homestead on the outskirts of town. An older Mexican man was working in a vegetable garden beside a modest adobe house. Manuel, Thomas called as they approached. The man straightened, shading his eyes against the sun. His weathered face broke into a smile when he recognized Thomas. Quinn, it has been too long, my friend. Manuel hurried to greet them, his smile faltering slightly when he noticed Danielle. And who is your companion? This is Danielle, Thomas said, helping her dismount. She's in trouble, Manuel. We need help. Manuel's expression grew serious. Come inside, he said, gesturing toward the house. Rosa will prepare food while you tell me what is happening. Inside the cool adobe home, Manuel's wife Rosa fussed over Danielle, insisting she sit at the table while she prepared a simple meal of beans, tortillas, and coffee. Thomas explained their situation in low tones, omitting some of the harsher details out of respect for Danielle's privacy. This O'Connor, Manuel said when Thomas finished. He is a powerful man, wealthy rancher with connections, Thomas confirmed, the kind who thinks the law doesn't apply to him. Manuel nodded grimly. And you plan to take the Senora to Utah. It's the safest option. O'Connor won't think to look that far north, and I have friends there who can help. It is a long journey, Rosa commented, placing a plate in front of Danielle. The Senora needs proper clothes supplies. That's why we're here, Thomas admitted. I was hoping you might help us. Manuel exchanged glances with his wife, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Of course we will help, he said. Rosa has clothing that may fit the Senora, and I have a mule you can take. One horse cannot carry two people so far. I can pay, Thomas began, but Manuel waved him off. You saved my grandson from that flash flood 2 years ago. This is nothing. While Rosa took Danielle to find suitable traveling clothes, Manuel and Thomas discussed routes to Utah. Avoid the main roads, Manuel advised. Perhaps go west before turning north. It is longer but less traveled. Thomas nodded. We'll need to be careful around settlements too. Word travels fast. I will go into town this afternoon, Manuel said. I can listen for news, see if there is already talk about a missing woman. By evening, Manuel returned with troubling information. Men matching Victor O'Connor's description had been asking questions in Tucson, offering rewards for information about Danielle. "They are saying she is unwell," Manuel reported. "That she killed her own child in madness and fled." Danielle, now dressed in a simple brown skirt and blouse borrowed from Rosa, went pale at his words. "He's trying to turn people against me," she whispered, "making them think I'm the murderer." "It's a smart play," Thomas admitted grimly. "People will be looking for a madwoman, not a victim." He turned to Manuel. "We need to leave tonight under cover of darkness." Manuel nodded. "Rosa has packed food and supplies. The mule is ready." As they prepared to depart, Rosa pressed a small bundle into Danielle's hands. "Medicines," she explained, "for the journey." "And this," she handed over a small silver medallion on a chain. "St. Christopher, for protection." Danielle's eyes welled with tears as she embraced the older woman. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Manuel walked them to the edge of his property where a sturdy mule stood packed with supplies. "Follow the old mining trail west," he advised. "It will take you past fewer settlements. God go with you both." Thomas clasped the man's hand. "I won't forget this, Manuel, nor I, my friend." "Be careful." Under the cover of darkness, Thomas and Danielle set out, Thomas leading his horse while Danielle rode the mule. They traveled through the night, stopping only when the first light of dawn made further progress risky. They made camp in a ravine, hidden from any passing riders. Thomas unloaded the bare essentials while Danielle tended to the animals. "You're good with them," Thomas observed as she stroked the mule's nose. "I've always loved animals," she said. "They were my only friends at the ranch. Victor wouldn't let me keep a dog, but there was an old barn cat that would sometimes visit me when he was away." Thomas spread a blanket beneath a scrubby juniper. "Rest here. I'll keep watch for a while." Danielle settled onto the blanket but didn't close her eyes. "I keep thinking about what Manuel said about Victor claiming I killed James." Her voice broke. "How can he do that? How can he blame me for what he did?" "Men like that never take responsibility," Thomas said, sitting nearby. "It's always someone else's fault. What if people believe him? What if we're caught and they send me to prison or worse?" Thomas met her eyes steadily. "That won't happen. We have the truth on our side, and I won't let anyone hurt you." "You barely know me," she pointed out. "Why risk so much?" Thomas was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. "Sometimes in life, you find yourself at a crossroads. You can turn away and mind your own business, or you can do what's right, no matter the cost. I've done both in my time, and I've learned which choice lets me sleep at night." Danielle studied his face. "You're a good man, Thomas Quinn." "I try to be," he said simply. "Now get some sleep. We've got a long journey ahead." Over the next several days they traveled mostly at night, keeping to remote trails and avoiding settlements. During daylight hours, they rested in whatever shelter they could find: caves, abandoned mining shacks, dense stands of trees. Thomas taught Danielle how to move silently, how to cover their tracks, and how to scan the horizon for dust that might indicate pursuing riders. Despite the circumstances, Thomas found himself admiring Danielle's resilience. The grief was still there. He often caught her staring into the distance, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. But she never complained about the harsh conditions, the meager food, or the constant fear of discovery. On the fifth night, as they made their way through a narrow canyon, a sudden rockfall spooked the horses. Thomas's mount reared, throwing him against the canyon wall. Pain exploded in his shoulder as he hit the ground. "Thomas!" Danielle was at his side in an instant, her hands gentle as she helped him sit up. "Are you hurt?" Thomas winced, testing his shoulder. "Nothing broken, I think, just bruised." He tried to stand but stumbled, Danielle catching him before he fell. "We need to stop," she said firmly. "You need rest." We can't afford to stop, Thomas argued, but Danielle was already leading him to a sheltered spot beneath an overhang. We can't afford for you to collapse either, she said. I'll make camp. Thomas watched in surprise as Danielle efficiently unloaded the animals, set up a small, sheltered fire, and prepared a simple meal from their supplies. She'd been paying attention to his methods over the past days. You're a quick study, he remarked as she handed him a cup of coffee. I've had to be, she replied. Victor never tolerated mistakes. Thomas frowned at the reminder of her husband. How's your shoulder feeling? Danielle asked, changing the subject. Sore, but it'll mend. He looked up at her. Thank you for taking charge. I'm not used to being the one who needs help. Danielle smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. We help each other. That's what you said we'd do. Thomas felt something stir within him at her smile, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. He quickly pushed the feeling aside. This woman was vulnerable, grieving, and depending on him for protection. The last thing she needed was more complication. Get some rest, Danielle told him. I'll keep watch for a while. Thomas wanted to protest, but found himself too exhausted to argue. His last thought before drifting off was how different Danielle looked in the firelight, less haunted, more determined. He woke several hours later to find Danielle still sitting vigilant, a small knife in her hand. She'd taken one of his revolvers too, placing it beside her. You should have woken me, he said, sitting up carefully. You needed the rest, she replied simply. How's the shoulder? Better, he lied, ignoring the throbbing pain. We should get moving soon. Danielle handed him a strip of jerky. Eat first. And don't lie about your shoulder. I can see you wincing every time you move. Thomas accepted the jerky with a rueful smile. Yes, madam. They traveled more cautiously that day, Thomas's injury slowing their pace. By evening, they had reached the border of Arizona and Utah territory. We're making good progress, Thomas said as they made camp near a small spring. Another week, maybe less, and we'll reach Tropic. Danielle looked thoughtful as she spread their blankets. What will happen when we get there? She asked. My friend Owen will help us. He can find you a place to stay, maybe work in the store if you want it. And you, will you stay too? Thomas hesitated. For a while, until I'm sure you're settled and safe. Danielle nodded, her expression unreadable. And then you'll go back to your horse trading. That's the plan, Thomas said. Though suddenly the prospect didn't seem as appealing as it once had. They ate in silence that evening, each lost in their own thoughts. As Thomas checked their supplies, Danielle spoke suddenly. I haven't thanked you properly, she said. For everything you've done. For helping me bury my son, for risking your life to help me escape. I don't know if I can ever repay you. You don't owe me anything, Danielle. I owe you my life, she countered. Victor would have killed me if I'd stayed or if he'd caught me alone. Thomas met her gaze across the small fire. You're a strong woman. You would have found a way to survive. Perhaps, she said, unconvinced. But I'm glad I didn't have to try alone. Something in her tone made Thomas's heart beat faster. He cleared his throat, looking away. We should get some sleep. Dawn comes early. The next morning, they continued north, crossing into rough territory where the red rock formations of southern Utah rose majestically against the sky. The terrain was challenging, but it offered numerous places to hide and rest during daylight hours. As they made their way through a narrow pass, Thomas suddenly raised his hand, signaling Danielle to stop. He dismounted carefully, motioning for her to do the same. What is it? She whispered, leading the mule into the shadow of a large boulder. Riders, Thomas murmured. Up ahead. They tied the animals and crept forward on foot. From behind a rocky outcropping, they could see 3 men on horseback about half a mile ahead, stopped on the trail. Bounty hunters, Thomas said grimly. Look at their gear. Danielle's hand flew to her mouth. Are they looking for me? Can't be sure, but we can't take chances. We'll have to go around them. They retreated to their animals and took a detour that added hours to their journey, climbing treacherous slopes and navigating dry washes. By nightfall, Danielle was swaying with exhaustion in her saddle. "We need to stop," Thomas insisted. "You're about to fall off that mule." They made camp in a small cave, not risking a fire despite the evening chill. Thomas shared the last of their bread and jerky, making a mental note that they'd need to find more supplies soon. "Do you think they were really looking for me?" Danielle asked as they huddled beneath blankets. "Hard to say," Thomas admitted. "Could be after anyone. There's no shortage of wanted men in these parts, but Victor has money and money buys loyalty. Will it ever be over?" She asked, her voice small. "Will I ever stop running?" Thomas reached over and squeezed her hand. "Yes," he promised. "One day you'll wake up and realize you haven't looked over your shoulder in weeks, then months, then years. How can you be sure? Because I've seen it happen. My sister's husband had friends, two powerful men who wanted to protect him. But eventually, people forget. New troubles come along, life goes on." Danielle's hand remained in his, warm and trusting. "I want to believe that," she whispered. "Then believe it," Thomas said simply. "Sometimes faith is all we have." They fell asleep like that, hands clasped between them, finding comfort in the simple human connection. The next day brought a new challenge. Their food supplies were dwindling, and they were still several days from tropic. Thomas studied their map, identifying a small settlement about a day's ride east. "It's risky," he admitted to Danielle, "but we need supplies, and I don't think we'll find game in this terrain." "Could you go alone?" she suggested. "I could wait somewhere safe." Thomas shook his head. "I don't want to leave you alone. If something happened to me, you'd be stranded." In the end, they decided to approach the settlement together, but cautiously. Thomas gave Danielle his spare hat to pull low over her face, and they agreed she would speak as little as possible. The settlement, little more than a trading post and a few scattered buildings, appeared quiet when they arrived the following day. An older man with a gray beard sat on the porch of the trading post, whittling a piece of wood. "Afternoon," Thomas called as they approached. "We're looking to buy some supplies." The man eyed them curiously. "Don't get many travelers through here this time of year," he remarked. "Where you folks headed?" "North," Thomas said vaguely. "Visiting family." The man nodded, seemingly accepting this. "Got most basics inside. Mabel runs the place now since her husband passed last winter." Inside the trading post, a middle-aged woman greeted them warmly. Thomas selected flour, coffee, beans, and jerky while Danielle browsed nearby, keeping her face partially hidden. "Your wife don't talk much," Mabel commented as she tallied their purchases. "She's feeling poorly," Thomas explained. "Trail's been hard on her." Mabel nodded sympathetically. "Had some men through here a few days back looking for a woman and a man traveling together," she mentioned casually. "Offering good money for information." Thomas felt Danielle stiffen beside him. "That's so," he said, keeping his voice neutral. "What they want them for, didn't say exactly. Just that the woman was dangerous, killed her own child, if you can believe it." Mabel shook her head. "Terrible thing." They had a poster with her picture. Thomas counted out money for their supplies, careful to keep his expression unchanged. "World's full of evil, I suppose," he commented. Mabel studied them for a moment longer than was comfortable. "Suppose it is," she agreed. "That'll be $3 even." Thomas paid and gathered their supplies. "Much obliged, madam." As they left the trading post, he could feel Mabel watching them. They mounted quickly and rode away at a casual pace, not wanting to appear hurried. "She knew," Danielle whispered once they were out of earshot. "She recognized me from the poster." "Maybe," Thomas conceded, "but she didn't raise the alarm, not while we were there anyway." They rode hard for several hours, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the trading post. When they finally stopped to rest, Danielle was trembling. "They're closing in," she said. "They have posters with my face on them. How will I ever be safe?" Thomas unloaded the fresh supplies, thinking. "The posters might work in our favor," he said finally. "How?" "They'll be looking for a woman who matches that description. So we change your appearance." That evening, using a pair of scissors from their supplies and a small mirror Thomas carried for shaving, he carefully cut Danielle's long dark hair. The shorn locks fell around them as he worked, transforming her appearance dramatically. When he finished, her hair barely reached her chin. "There," he said, handing her the mirror. "Different already." Danielle touched her shortened hair, a mix of emotions crossing her face. "Victor always insisted I keep it long," she murmured. "He'd be furious to see it like this." "Do you mind it?" Thomas asked, suddenly worried he'd overstepped. To his surprise, Danielle smiled. "No," she said. "It feels freeing somehow, like shedding an old skin." Thomas found himself returning her smile, struck by how the shorter hair emphasized the delicate lines of her face, the clear blue of her eyes. "It suits you," he said softly. Their gazes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Danielle looked away, a flush coloring her cheeks. "We should eat," she said, busying herself with their new supplies, "and plan our route for tomorrow." Thomas nodded, turning to tend the horses, but the memory of her smile lingered with him. The next 2 days passed without incident as they traveled steadily northward. The terrain grew more varied, red rock formations giving way to juniper-dotted hills, and eventually to small stands of pine, as they gained elevation. Game became more plentiful, and Thomas managed to shoot a rabbit, providing a welcome change from their preserved rations. As they sat by their fire that evening, savoring the fresh meat, Danielle seemed more relaxed than Thomas had yet seen her. "Tell me about Tropic," she requested. "What kind of place is it?" "Small," Thomas said. "Maybe 20 families at last count. Good people, mostly farmers and ranchers. They're building a proper church now, I hear. Owen, my friend, he came there 3 years ago with his wife Sarah. They run the general store and sometimes put up travelers in their back room. And they'll welcome a stranger, a woman with a questionable past," Thomas smiled. "They welcomed me, and my past is far from spotless. Besides, Owen owes me. I saved him from a card sharp in Durango once before he met Sarah." "You've led an interesting life, Thomas Quinn," Danielle observed. "I've wandered more than most," he admitted. "Never seemed to find a reason to stay in one place. And now, do you ever think about settling down?" The question caught Thomas off guard. "Sometimes," he said after a moment. "More often lately." Danielle nodded, poking at the fire with a stick. "I used to dream of a home," she said quietly. "A real home, not like what I had with Victor. Somewhere peaceful with children running around, maybe a garden." She trailed off, her expression clouding. "That was before." "Before doesn't have to determine after," Thomas said gently. "You're still young, Danielle. There could still be a home, a garden." "No more children," she said, shaking her head. "I couldn't bear to lose another." Thomas wanted to argue, to tell her that her capacity for love was too great to be closed off forever, but he held his tongue. Her wounds were still too fresh. "One day at a time," he said instead. "First we get you safe in Tropic, then you decide what comes next." Danielle looked up at him, the firelight dancing in her eyes. "And you, will you stay? Or will the road call you away again?" Thomas found he couldn't answer. The truth was, he hadn't thought much beyond getting Danielle to safety. The idea of leaving her in Tropic and continuing his solitary existence suddenly seemed hollow. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "Guess we'll both be figuring out what comes next." The following morning dawned clear and cold. As they prepared to depart, Thomas noticed Danielle shivering despite the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "Here," he said, removing his coat and placing it around her. "This'll keep you warmer." "But you'll be cold," she protested. Thomas smiled. "I'm used to it. Besides, we'll be riding hard today, should reach Tropic by nightfall if the weather holds." They made good time that day, the animals seeming to sense their destination was near. As the sun began to set, they crested a hill and saw below them a small collection of buildings nestled in a valley. "Tropic," Thomas said, pointing. "We made it." The relief on Danielle's face was palpable. "It's really over," she whispered. "This part of it, at least," Thomas said. "Come on, Owen will be closing the store soon." They rode into town just as lamps were being lit in windows. A few people on the street glanced curiously at them, but offered friendly nods. The general store stood at the center of the small settlement, a two-story building with living quarters above. Thomas helped Danielle dismount, both of them stiff from the long day's ride. He tied the animals to the hitching post and led her to the store's entrance, where a closed sign had just been hung. He knocked firmly. After a moment, a tall man with sandy hair and spectacles opened the door. "We're closed for the," he began, then broke into a wide grin. "Thomas Quinn." "You old devil." "Hello, Owen," Thomas said, smiling as his friend pulled him into a hearty embrace. "Sorry to arrive at closing time, but we've had a long journey." Owen stepped back, noticing Danielle for the first time. "And who might this be?" "This is Danielle," Thomas said. "She's—" He hesitated, unsure how to explain. "I'm in trouble," Danielle said simply. "Thomas has been helping me." Owen studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Any friend of Thomas is welcome here. Come in, both of you. Sarah will be thrilled to have company." He ushered them inside, locking the door behind them. The store was warm and well-stocked, the scent of coffee and baking bread lingering in the air. "Sarah." Owen called up the stairs at the back of the store. "Come down, Thomas is here and he's brought a guest." A petite woman with auburn hair appeared at the top of the stairs, her face lighting up when she saw Thomas. "Thomas Quinn, it's been ages." She hurried down to embrace him. "You're thin as a rail, haven't you been eating?" Thomas laughed. "Been on the trail a while, Sarah. This is Danielle." Sarah turned to Danielle with a warm smile. "Welcome to our home," she said, taking in Danielle's travel-worn appearance with a sympathetic eye. "You poor thing, you look exhausted. Come upstairs, both of you. I was just about to serve supper." As Sarah led them upstairs to the living quarters above the store, Thomas felt some of the tension leave his body. They were safe, at least for now. In the cozy kitchen, Sarah busied herself setting 2 more places at the table while Owen poured coffee. "So," Owen said once they were all seated, "what brings you to Tropic? Last I heard, you were trading horses down New Mexico way." Thomas glanced at Danielle, who gave a slight nod. He proceeded to tell their story, omitting some of the harsher details but making clear the danger they faced. Owen and Sarah listened in stunned silence. "My God," Sarah whispered when he finished. "That poor child." Owen's expression had grown grim. "And this husband, you think he'll keep looking for her?" "Men like him don't give up easily," Thomas said, "but he might not think to look this far north." "At least, that's what we're hoping." "You'll stay here, of course," Sarah said, reaching across the table to squeeze Danielle's hand. "We have a spare room that's yours for as long as you need it." "And Thomas?" Danielle asked, her voice small. "There's the room above the stable," Owen said. "Not fancy, but it's warm and private." Thomas nodded gratefully. "That's more than enough. Thank you both." "No thanks needed," Owen said firmly. "You do the same for us." After supper, Sarah showed Danielle to the spare room while Owen helped Thomas settle the animals in the stable behind the store. "She's been through hell," Owen commented as they worked, but she seems strong. Stronger than she knows, Thomas agreed. Owen gave him a sidelong glance. And what about you? Are you staying for a while, or is this just a stop on your journey? Thomas forked hay into the stalls, considering. Thought I'd stay a bit, make sure she's settled. Just being a good Samaritan, are you? Owen's tone was knowing. Thomas shot him a warning look. She's vulnerable, Owen. Lost her child, running for her life. The last thing she needs is complications. Didn't say anything about complications, Owen said innocently. Just noticed you look at her different than I've seen you look at anybody before. Drop it, Thomas said firmly. Owen raised his hands in surrender. Consider it dropped, but my offer stands. Job at the store if you want it. Town's growing and I could use the help. Thomas nodded, grateful for the change of subject. I'll think about it. Later, as he settled into the small but comfortable room above the stable, Thomas found himself thinking about Owen's words. Did he look at Danielle differently? And if he did, what did that mean? She was beautiful, yes, and brave beyond measure. But she was also broken in ways that might never fully heal. And he was a drifter, a man with blood on his hands and a past he rarely discussed. What could he possibly offer her except protection? With these troubled thoughts, he eventually drifted into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, Thomas woke to the sounds of the town coming to life, wagons rolling past, people calling greetings, a dog barking in the distance. For a moment, he was disoriented, unused to waking in a proper bed after weeks on the trail. Then memory returned, and with it a sense of accomplishment. They had made it to Tropic. Danielle was safe, at least for now. He dressed and made his way to the store, where he found Owen already open for business, arranging merchandise on the shelves. Morning, Owen greeted him. Sleep well. Better than I have in weeks, Thomas admitted. Danielle up yet? Sarah took her to get some new clothes. Poor thing had nothing but what she was wearing. Owen handed Thomas a cup of coffee. So, what's your plan now? Thomas sipped the hot coffee, grateful for its warmth. Need to send some telegrams, let my contacts know where I am. Then I suppose I'll see if your job offer still stands. Owen raised an eyebrow. Staying, are you? For a while, Thomas hedged. At least until I'm sure Danielle's settled and safe. Owen smiled knowingly but said nothing more on the subject. Instead, he put Thomas to work taking inventory in the storeroom, a task that occupied him for most of the morning. Around midday, the store's bell jingled, and Thomas emerged from the storeroom to see Sarah enter with Danielle. He almost didn't recognize her at first. Gone was the trail-worn woman in borrowed clothes. In her place stood a lady in a simple but becoming blue dress, her short hair neatly styled. Though still thin from their journey, there was a new color in her cheeks, a brightness in her eyes. Thomas, she exclaimed when she saw him. Sarah's been showing me the town. Everyone's so kind here. Thomas found himself momentarily speechless. You look. He began, then faltered, unsure how to express what he was feeling. Clean, Danielle suggested with a small smile. Presentable. Beautiful, Thomas said simply. A blush colored Danielle's cheeks as Sarah and Owen exchanged glances. I'll just put on some lunch, Sarah said tactfully, heading for the stairs. And I have a customer waiting, Owen added, though the store was empty. He disappeared into the back room, leaving Thomas and Danielle alone. Sarah says there's a position available at the school, Danielle said after a moment. They need someone to help with the younger children. I told her I used to teach James his letters. She trailed off, pain flashing across her face at the mention of her son. You'd be good at that, Thomas said gently. Children would love you. Danielle looked up at him. Do you really think so? After everything that's happened, I wasn't sure I could. Be around children. Thomas finished for her. I think maybe it's exactly what you need. a chance to give all that love somewhere. Danielle's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled through them. "Perhaps you're right," she whispered. "Thank you, Thomas, for everything." Before he could respond, she stepped forward and kissed his cheek softly. Then she hurried up the stairs, leaving Thomas standing alone in the store, his hand raised to the spot where her lips had touched his skin. Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. Thomas worked at the store with Owen, while Danielle began assisting at the small schoolhouse 3 days a week. In the evenings, they often shared meals with Owen and Sarah, sometimes joined by other townspeople curious about the newcomers. Thomas noticed how Danielle gradually emerged from her shell, laughing more, speaking up in conversations, even singing sometimes, as she helped Sarah with household tasks. The haunted look never completely left her eyes, but it receded, appearing only in unguarded moments when she thought no one was watching. For his part, Thomas found himself settling into life in Tropic with surprising ease. The work at the store was straightforward, the people friendly without being intrusive. And each day, he found new reasons to stay, most of them centered around Danielle. One evening, about a month after their arrival, Thomas returned to his room above the stable to find a small package wrapped in brown paper outside his door. Inside was a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue wool, with a note in Danielle's neat handwriting. "For the man who gave me his coat. Thank you for keeping me warm. D." Thomas ran the soft wool between his fingers, touched by the gesture. He hadn't known she could knit. The next morning, he wore the scarf to work despite the mild weather. When Danielle stopped by the store on her way to the schoolhouse, her face lit up seeing it around his neck. "It looks good on you," she said shyly. "Best gift I've ever received," he told her honestly. As the weeks turned into months, Thomas found himself thinking less and less about moving on. The telegrams to his business contacts became less frequent, and he began investing more of himself in the store and the community. He helped build an addition to the schoolhouse, repaired the roof of the church after a storm, and even joined the town council when asked. Danielle, too, was putting down roots. She moved from assistant to full teacher at the school, her natural warmth and patience making her a favorite with the children. She rented a small cottage near the schoolhouse, filling it with simple furniture and, to Thomas's delight, starting a garden. They saw each other nearly every day at the store, around town, at community gatherings. Their friendship deepened, comfortable and easy, though Thomas was always conscious of keeping a certain distance. She was still healing, he reminded himself. Still finding her way back to herself after years of abuse and the devastating loss of her child. But sometimes, when their hands accidentally touched passing items across the dinner table, or when he caught her looking at him with a soft expression, Thomas wondered if perhaps they were both ready for something more. Winter came to Tropic, bringing snow and long evenings by the fire. On Christmas Eve, the whole town gathered in the newly completed church for carols and communion. Thomas stood at the back, watching as Danielle helped organize the children for their nativity performance. She looked up, catching his eye across the crowded room, and smiled in a way that made his heart skip. In that moment, Thomas knew with absolute certainty that he was in love with her. The realization should have frightened him, he, who had avoided attachments for so long, but instead, it felt like coming home after a long journey. After the service, they walked together through the snowy streets, their breath clouding in the cold air. "The children were wonderful tonight," Thomas commented. "You've done amazing work with them." Danielle smiled. "They're eager to learn, eager to please. It makes teaching a joy." She hesitated, then added softly, "James would have been 6 this year. He loved Christmas." Thomas took her hand, squeezing gently. "I'm sure he did." They stopped outside her cottage, snow falling gently around them. The windows of nearby homes glowed with warmth and light, and somewhere in the distance, someone was playing a fiddle. "Would you like to come in?" Danielle asked. "I have coffee, and Sarah sent me home with pie." Thomas nodded, suddenly nervous in a way he hadn't been since boyhood. Inside, the cottage was warm and inviting, decorated simply for the season with pine boughs and red ribbons. A small fire crackled in the hearth, casting a golden glow over the modest furnishings. Danielle busied herself with the coffee while Thomas stood awkwardly by the fire, trying to gather his courage. "Thomas," she said suddenly, turning to face him, "there's something I've been wanting to tell you." "What is it?" he asked, his heart pounding. She took a deep breath. "I received a letter last week from the sheriff in Green Valley." Thomas stiffened. "What did it say?" "Victor is dead," she said, her voice steady. "Shot in a saloon brawl 2 months ago. The sheriff wanted to inform me as next of kin." Thomas absorbed this news, a mix of emotions washing through him: relief for Danielle's safety, satisfaction that her tormentor was gone, concern for how she was handling the news. "How do you feel about it?" he asked carefully. Danielle considered this, her face thoughtful. "Relieved," she admitted. Then guilty for feeling relieved. Then angry that he died so easily when James. She swallowed hard. "But mostly I feel free, truly free for the first time in years." She moved closer to him, her eyes searching his. "I don't have to look over my shoulder anymore. I don't have to worry about being found. I can just live." "I'm glad," Thomas said softly. "You deserve that freedom." "There's more," she continued. "The sheriff said that since Victor had no other family, his property comes to me as his widow. The ranch, the money, all of it." Thomas was stunned. "That's a lot to take in. Will you go back, claim it?" Danielle shook her head firmly. "No, I've instructed the sheriff to sell everything and send the money here. I don't want anything from that life except what it can give me to build a new one." She reached up, touching his face gently. "A new one here in Tropic. With you if you want that too." Thomas caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. "I want that more than anything," he confessed. "I love you, Danielle. I think I have since I found you in the desert." "I love you too," she whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You helped me bury my past, Thomas. Now I want to build a future with you." He pulled her close, his arms encircling her slender form. When their lips met, it felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. The next morning, Christmas Day, they walked hand in hand to Owen and Sarah's house for dinner. The news of Victor's death and their newfound relationship was received with joy and relief by their friends. "About time," Owen remarked, clapping Thomas on the shoulder. "I was beginning to think you'd never work up the nerve." Sarah hugged Danielle tightly. "I'm so happy for you both," she said. "You deserve every happiness." As winter gave way to spring, Thomas and Danielle's relationship blossomed along with Danielle's garden. They were married in April, a simple ceremony in the church with the whole town in attendance. Danielle wore a dress of pale blue silk, purchased with some of the money from the sale of Victor's ranch, and carried wildflowers picked that morning from the hills around Tropic. With their combined resources, they built a home on the edge of town, not large, but comfortable, with a wide porch overlooking the valley and plenty of room for Danielle's expanding garden. Thomas continued working at the store, eventually becoming Owen's partner when the business grew too large for one man to manage. Danielle maintained her position at the school, her natural talent for teaching making her beloved by students and parents alike. In the evenings, they would sit on their porch, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and crimson, talking about their day or sometimes just sitting in companionable silence. On the anniversary of James's death, they rode out to a hilltop near town. Danielle carried a small wooden box containing a toy horse identical to the one she had left on her son's grave in the Arizona desert. "I want to remember him here," she explained as they reached the summit, "in our new home." Together, they buried the box beneath a young pine tree, Thomas's arm steady around Danielle's shoulders as she wept quietly. "He would have liked it here," she said as they stood looking out over the valley. "All this space to run and play." "He would have," Thomas agreed, holding her close. "And he would have been proud of his mama, how brave she's been." They stood in silence for a time, the wind whispering through the pine needles above them. Then Danielle turned in his arms, her face upturned to his. "I have something to tell you," she said, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth despite her tears. Thomas raised an eyebrow, waiting. "Dr. Mills confirmed it yesterday," she continued. "We're going to have a baby. In November." Joy and surprise washed over Thomas in equal measure. "A baby," he repeated, his hands moving instinctively to her still flat stomach. "Are you certain?" Danielle nodded, her smile growing even as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "Certain. Are you happy?" "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Thomas said, his own eyes welling as he pulled her close. "But are you ready? I know you said." "I'm scared," she admitted. "Terrified, actually, but also so very ready to love again, to be a mother again." She looked up at him, her expression serious. "As long as you're with me, I can face anything, even this." "Always," Thomas promised, sealing the vow with a kiss. "I'll be with you always." The months that followed were filled with preparation and anticipation. Thomas expanded the garden to include a small orchard, while Danielle sewed tiny garments and transformed one of the bedrooms into a nursery. The whole town seemed to share in their joy, with gifts of handmade blankets, wooden toys, and practical advice flowing freely. On a cold November night, after a labor that left Thomas pacing anxiously outside their bedroom door for hours, Danielle gave birth to a son. They named him Ethan James Quinn, honoring both the child they had lost and the new life they had created together. As Thomas held his son for the first time, marveling at the tiny fingers and perfect face, he felt a completion he had never known was possible. Danielle watched from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "He looks like you," she said softly. Thomas shook his head. "He has your eyes, and hopefully your temperament. The world doesn't need another stubborn Quinn." Danielle laughed, reaching out to take his hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for finding me that day, for helping me bury my past, for giving me a future I never thought I'd have." "No," Thomas said, sitting beside her on the bed, their son cradled between them. "Thank you for teaching me what home really means." Outside, snow began to fall, covering Tropic in a blanket of white. But inside their home, all was warmth and light and hope, the promise of a future built from the ashes of a painful past. In the years that followed, their family grew. A daughter, Sarah Rose, joined them 2 years after Ethan, followed by another son, Michael, 3 years later. The home that had once seemed almost too large gradually filled with laughter, toys, and the organized chaos of family life. Danielle continued teaching until Sarah's birth, then focused on raising their children and tending to her garden, which became famous throughout the county for its beauty and bounty. Thomas expanded the general store, eventually opening a second location in a neighboring settlement, though he always made sure to be home for supper with his family. They never forgot James. Each year on his birthday, they would ride to the hilltop and leave flowers beneath the pine tree, which grew tall and strong as the years passed. They told their children about their older brother who watched over them from heaven, ensuring his memory lived on in their new family. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, Thomas and Danielle would sit on their porch and remember the long journey that had brought them together, a desperate woman digging her child's grave in the desert, and the cowboy who stopped to help, neither knowing that in burying the past, they would find their future in each other.